Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome to yet another fun-filled week of our Shakespeare class. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching She's the Man and comparing it to Twelfth Night. Shakespeare discusses ideas and uses humor that I think is really interesting in the way that it transcends time and space. Like if you're reading his works, as we have, from our giant book, and you're reading it, you're like, oh, some of this is dated. And it is. But he remains funny somehow. And we're able to translate that into a lot of different mediums, like She's the Man. Or if you've watched Taming of the Shrew, there's a movie called 10 Things I Hate About You, which is a great interpretation of Taming of the Shrew. Hamlet is the basis of The Lion King. You know, there's a lot of ideas that have translated across time and space. If you want, like, my very favorite interpretation of a Shakespeare play, are you guys ready for this? They did Romeo and Juliet, except it's called Romeo and Juliet, and it's about garden gnomes. I kid you not, guys, this exists, and I may have giggled an embarrassing amount for a children's movie. Because it is Shakespeare, they follow the Shakespeare plot pretty well. I mean, obviously there are some differences because it is a children's movie, so there's not like so much stabbing, which is probably good. A lot less suicide and dying and stuff, which is also good. So it makes the play much more enjoyable. And it's all about garden gnomes, which is freaking hilarious. There's a line in here. The movie came out, in 2011? So 10 years ago. There's a line in here that my family still quotes back and forth to each other because we just find it so freaking funny. So if you want a really fun interpretation of Shakespeare, they made it into a children's movie about garden gnomes. So check it out. You're welcome. That should make your entire day because it's awesome. And if we were doing Romeo and Juliet in this class, you better freaking believe we would be watching Romeo and Juliet. But everybody's read Romeo and Juliet. Most people had to do it in high school. So, that's why we're not doing it in this class. It's overdone. We're all familiar with it. However, if you find yourself bored one day, watch that movie because it's awesome. Okay. Anyway, moving on. That was my little soapbox of awesome Shakespeare interpretations, children's movies, where it's at. And it's not just because I have toddlers. I do watch some grown-up movies. Not very many, but a couple. So this week, we are working with The Merchant of Venice. And this play is really interesting. People struggle to categorize The Merchant of Venice, which is why we're kind of using it to finish our comedy unit and transfer into our histories unit. Because The Merchant of Venice is much more drama and much less comedy. So depending on what Shakespearean experts you're talking with, it goes in several different categories. Some people even put it in the tragedy category, depending on who you're identifying as the main character and whose story arc you're most invested in. Because some of the story arcs do not end well, and some of them do. So how do you categorize this? Because as we look at Shakespeare's traditional comedy, people can go through a lot of difficulties, but you know it's going to end well. The lovers are going to get together, everyone gets a happy ending, and the world continues on. That is not necessarily the case in The Merchant of Venice. Some people get happy endings, some lovers get happy endings, but some don't. And so it's interesting to categorize, and people struggle categorizing it. So that's why it's kind of rounding out our comedy as we're transitioning into a new genre. This is a nice little bridge between comedy and the histories, the dramas, the tragedies. It bridges that gap very nicely. So we're going to be working with The Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice is also very interesting because depending on who you're reading, once again, who's analyzing this play, it can be read in a couple different lights. Just like some of our later plays, when we read The Tempest, there's some post-colonial reading that reads in some racism theory and some indigenous peoples theory that we'll be talking about. The Merchant of Venice has some very distinct stereotypes it discusses, particularly stereotypes about the Jewish people. And this is historically accurate. If you're looking at Italy and Rome and the surrounding European areas during this time period, there was a lot of anti-Semitism going on. In fact, to such a degree that there was like a Jewish quarter. Like people had to live in a certain place if they were of Jewish ancestry. So there was that kind of segregation happening within the cities. And so we've got a character, Shylock, is one of the main characters in this play, and he gets cast as the villain a lot. Some of that is because of the cultural stereotypes that were the case during Shakespeare's time. So it is historically accurate in that way. Some of the depictions of people are based in those stereotypes. Some of the comedy is based in those stereotypes. So as you're reading Merchant of Venice, kind of read it through a couple different lenses. Like read it as a modern audience who knows that this kind of segregation, this kind of delineation of peoples, this kind of stereotyping is not a good thing, right? Like when we make it an us versus them sort of scenario with people groups, that never ever ends well, right? Like that doesn't exactly foster empathy and social understanding and good relationships, right? It doesn't. And you'll see that that holds true in The Merchant of Venice as well. So read from our modern stance, but also put yourself in that historical mindset, because otherwise you're going to hate some of the characters for the stereotyping that they're doing. So you have to place yourself in Shakespeare's kind of mindset in order to empathize with some of our characters. So read through that dual lens, because that's part of the magic of Shakespeare. It is a part of history, so it has to be historically contextualized, but we are a modern audience with modern understanding and sensibilities, and we've got all of this weight of history behind us that says grouping people in this way is not a productive thing to do. So we have that understanding as well. So we read with this kind of duality. So read about the Merchant of Venice, all this background information, very important stuff. And then start reading The Merchant of Venice on Tuesday. Once again, you have by Friday to finish it. We will have the recorded lecture for Merchant of Venice posted by this evening. So you'll have plenty of time. Watch it by Wednesday, but we'll have plenty of time to make it through that. The PowerPoint will talk through our themes and all of that, but we'll also talk about a little bit more about the critical reception and how that's changed over time, and some of the controversy of this play, particularly as it's performed in the modern era. And then we'll watch The Merchant of Venice. All of those are posted for you in the modules tab. There's a really, really excellent copy that I found for free, which is exciting, and I'll show you in a minute. And then we've got our assignment. So this is one of our bigger assignments for the quarter. So I want to outline it a bit more for you here, because you are going to be writing a short essay, because this play is pretty complex. And so I want you to use your time wisely and well as we go into this. So short essay of about 750 words. I use the word short essay because if it was like an English 101 class, 750 words would be a pretty short essay in that context. But for our context, this is the longest essay you're going to have to write in this class. And I've given you an outline here to kind of help guide your writing. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to read and watch the play, and it deals a lot with perception, about stereotypes and how damaging stereotypes can be. And it does acknowledge that the play can feel outdated at times. So we're going to read this article, Gypsies, Jews, and the Merchant of Venice, which is a really interesting article. I will fix the link. It's in the modules folder, though, so we'll go there in a minute. We'll read through the article, and then we'll use it as a source in our essay. This is going to be about 750 words, and we're going to be analyzing the stereotypes in The Merchant of Venice. And there's a couple different places where Shakespeare uses stereotypes here, particularly in, there's a character named Portia. She's very wealthy. Her father has died, and she is unmarried, so she needs to find somebody to marry her. But her dad made a challenge that a suitor has to pass before they can marry her. It's a lot like Indiana Jones and example, The Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when they're looking for the Holy Grail, the goblet, and they're in that room, and there's all those cups, and Indiana Jones has to choose which cup is the actual real one. And the Nazi guy, who's clearly the bad guy, because Nazis are always the bad guys, drinks from the wrong cup and like his face melts and stuff. So if you've not seen Indiana Jones, sorry, spoiler alert, the guy's face melts. But this is kind of the inspiration for the Indiana Jones movie. Portia suitors have to pick between a couple different like treasure boxes, chests. And if they pick the right chest, they can marry Portia. If they pick the wrong chest, they get to die. So that's fun. So Shakespeare's got some very interesting stereotypes about Portia suitors. There are definitely religious stereotypes, as we talked about, particularly some anti-Semitic ones. And then gender stereotypes. We do have cross-dressing again in this play. And the gender stereotypes are really interesting because the women are actually the ones who save the day. The guys just mess everything up, and the girls have to swoop in and save everyone, which I think is very interesting, particularly in a Shakespeare play, because that kind of idea was not necessarily positively recepted in Elizabethan era. So the fact that Shakespeare likes to turn gender stereotypes on their head is pretty fun. So we're going to organize our essay as we see here. So we've got an introductory paragraph, you'll give a short summary of the play, you'll discuss the role of stereotypes in the play, and then we'll have a clear thesis statement that tells the reader what stereotypes you will address. So a thesis statement in this way could say something along the lines of, Shakespeare's play The Merchant of Venice discusses stereotypes in the form of religious stereotypes, gender stereotypes, and racial stereotypes. Thesis statement, voila, right there for you. Boom. Obviously put it in your own words, but that's a very good example of what your thesis could look like. Then we've got our body paragraph, which is all about religious stereotypes. Talk about potentially how the Jewish people in this play are stereotyped. We need a clear topic sentence. We want at least one quote in each of these paragraphs from the play or from the article. And then an analysis of the quote or example you provided. So all of our quotes should be in a quote sandwich. Introduce the quote, give the quote, and then explain how the quote is significant, how it supports your analysis. Then we'll move on to paragraph 2, which will talk about gender stereotypes. You could talk about Portia and cross-dressing and how she and Rachel kind of save the day after the guys have bungled everything. Use a quote, cite the quote, analyze the quote. Paragraph 3 could be about racial stereotypes. You'll see this particularly in Portia's suitors. So if you're looking for racial stereotypes, start there. That's a good place. Talk about the racial stereotypes, give a quote to support it, and then analyze the quote. And then we will write a conclusion paragraph. So this will be your standard 5-paragraph essay. A conclusion where we talk about what lessons we can take away from The Merchant of Venice, maybe how we see stereotypes play out in modern times, what potentially we can do to change perception of stereotypes, and then a call to action. What is the one big idea you want your reader to take away from your essay? And that's how we'll wrap it all up. Do try to do this in MLA format. If you're unfamiliar with MLA format, I've got resources posted for you in the modules tab in the folder for The Merchant of Venice. So that'll help you out. And that's the big essay. That's how we're gonna analyze our reading here. So make sure to invest in this. We've got our modules set up for you for The Merchant of Venice. Later today, I'll be posting the MLA links and the Merchant of Venice PowerPoint, so that'll be up. But here is the article you need, Gypsies, Jews, and the Merchant of Venice. It works here. I'm not sure why it doesn't work anywhere else. But great article about this kind of stereotyping in the play. And then we've got the video production. This video version is awesome. Like, it is very, very good. We get it through the Alexander Street streaming service. So make sure to take advantage of that. I'm making this video way too long. All right, I'll put the rest in writing in our announcements because the video caps at 15 minutes and I've got 10 seconds left. So if you have any questions about the play, reach out. I'm here to help. Otherwise, the rest of your info will be in the announcements.